So, I almost forgot to film my video again for the second day in a row. I didn't forget, I'm here, but I think that this is a pretty clear sign that I need to reinstate the airplane mode rule that I had for a while, of that I'm not allowed to take my phone off of airplane mode until I finish recording the video, which I had been doing this with getting in the pool. I may return to doing that at some point in the future, but yeah, I think that while it does create certain incentives that I dislike, meaning like say that I have my singing lesson at 8:30 and I need to take my phone off of airplane mode to be able to do that, and I haven't recorded my video yet, there's a pretty good chance it's going to be like a 1 minute video where I'm not saying a whole lot because it's not the thing that's top of mind. So there are trade-offs with that rule. But I think overall it's probably a net positive at the very least, which is keeping me consistent. And I know that the more consistent that I am, the more videos that I am going to create that are actually meaningful, right? And so I may find a better way to do that in the future, but at least for the present, that seems like a good way to operate. Outside of that, I didn't get off to the best start today, which we can retrace to playing volleyball again last night, which I love. It's super fun, but I went to bed earlier, but it's still 2 a.m., right? Better than 4 a.m. last week, but yeah. I just really don't think it's realistically going to be conducive to what I want to do. And that's not to say that I can never play volleyball again. In a couple months, it's going to be cool enough outside that people will play on Saturday afternoons, and that works perfect. So I think that that's a good thing to do. I think that for the time being, though, probably playing volleyball on Thursday nights is a no-go for me. And that sucks. That's hard because I really do enjoy it. I don't have a ton of time that I spend like in social groups outside of work. And I've intentionally chosen / created a work environment where I do get a lot of my social needs fulfilled, of just being able to really connect with people there and having some of that closeness that I love. So that helps. But yeah, it's good to have like group things outside of work. And in all honesty, I go to volleyball. I go to pool parties. I have 3 good friends that I hang out with, or at least speak to on at least semi-regular basis. Outside of that, it's mostly if I have a girl that I date for a few weeks to a few months before that fizzles out, which that probably sounded more pessimistic than I intended to. Although, I'll put it this way. I know what I want to be building long term. I know that there's a lot of truth to the quote of you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time around. And I know that any relationship takes up a really substantial percentage of not just the time that we're together, but my mental energy outside of that, because I care a lot. And so I think it'd be really silly to totally write off dating at this stage of my life. Like, that's nonsense. But I think it's a lot more sensible to do what I really kind of decided, I don't know, a few weeks ago, of where it's not that I'm not open to it, but dating is just substantially lower on the priority list for me than I would have assessed it as being a few months back. And I've done a lot of learning and have a lot more clarity of what I want from the relationships slash things that sort of approximated relationships, more of the latter than the former. But it's taught me a ton, and it's helped me to process what's actually important to me here. And also just navigating that. Like, the COVID years were weird for me, as I'm sure they were for all of us in some ways. But yeah, I ended up being very isolated for a long time because that coincided with me going through some health problems and then having a lot of life. Well, and then 2022 was an interesting year that I will elaborate further on in the forthcoming failure to launch video that I continue to mention, but keep failing to launch. But again, I have a firm date set for that of November 9th. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, like, I spent a lot of my adolescence around people who were way older than me. Like, I was working full time from when I was 15. And so there really were not great dating pools during that time. And I mean, like, I would still go out and meet girls that had like a fake ID, and I would go to clubs, but I was never like in a way of where I would like actually be able to make any sort of connection with somebody in that environment that was going to last. Partly because I was 16, partly because those environments are not super conducive to that anyway, but I digress, as I often do. And then after that adolescence period of like when I was 18, I was working as a personal trainer at EOS back in the day, and I really was starting to find a sense of being connected with people my own age. But then COVID hit, and then the next 3 years were very, very strange. So anyway, that's probably close to the shortest version that I could tell of a longer, more complex story of my I was going to say love life, but it doesn't quite feel right. I'll give that some thought on the romantic entanglements that I've engaged in, or the lack thereof. And again, there's more to that story, but over the last year and a half is where the vast majority of my experience with the aforementioned relationships, or things approximating relationships, has taken place. And it's taught me a ton. And honestly, I feel like the first chunk of that time, I was mostly just dealing with processing the emotions for the first time, like kind of the things that people would be working through in high school or college. I don't know who people are, right? Like everybody has their own individual thing, but like those things that, at least from my perception, I'm like, oh, well, if my life was more quote unquote normal, then I would have experienced these things earlier. Maybe that's true, but would I want my life to be more normal? No. Like, if I could rerun it from here every time, give me that 100%. And I'm really happy with where I've landed, and I can't take all the credit for it, but I will say that I've grown up a lot. I've grown up pretty fast, because that's what my life required me to do. And being 23 years old, I have a pretty damn good sense of the future that I'm building. I have a growing stack of evidence of my capacity for creating that future, or at the very least, for putting in the work that is a necessity for that future to be possible. And I'm learning. And so I think there's plenty more that I can gain from dating and relationships now, but this is kind of the thought that sparked this whole thing of like, my standards are very high. I would honestly say, like, even as I look back, I don't regret any of the, call it, romantic connections that I've made, really, because of what I learned from them. But it's very clear to me in hindsight that none of them were really, like, I had no expectations of finding a life partner right this second, but just weren't going to last. They weren't going to be what I wanted them to be. And so part of it is a question of like creating expectations that are too high. And I think that recently I've been getting a lot better at that, in part from some feedback of a good friend of mine. And part of it, though, too, is that the life that I want to create is never going to be a normal one. And I've made my peace with that. In fact, I have kind of embraced that, of where I want to be the version of myself that really can impact our collective future in a positive direction, even if it's just a little nudge, right? And live in the most appreciative, embodied way as I operate day to day. I think that's what I am striving to do. It's going to take me some time to find a person who's not only equipped, but also, like, really desires to build that life, not just in general, but specifically with me. Because I can imagine a lot of people who might say a similar sentence to the one I just said, but then if I actually spelled out, like, well, these are my big plans, it would not be as interesting to them. And that's okay. But I'll close on this. There's this idea that I heard, I can't remember from who, on a podcast somewhere, but talking about how much you want something is directly correlated with being unwilling to settle for the version of said thing that is not what you want. And it's easier said than done. I do think there's degrees of application to this. Like, should I be in a mindset of, like, well, if she's not my life partner, then I can't date her at all, and I'm only willing to, like, that seems silly to me. And not only is it somewhat silly in general, but it also is likely counterproductive, because a huge aspect of what I'm doing in terms of dating and relationship right now, not only processing those emotions and learning how to navigate that, but just developing relationship skills to be able to really show up as the person that I need to be. And I've gotten a lot better at it by practicing. Like, that's how you get better at anything. And so it'd be really quite silly of me to say, well, because it's unlikely for me to find my life partner right this second, then I should write off dating entirely. That's nonsense. That's gonna make it harder to create the life that I want in the future. But at the same time, I'm definitely not willing to overcommit, and I've been getting gradually more and more intentional about the ways that I spend my time. So, as far as things that I need to do in my life, this does feel important to me in a strange way. And I have a broad sense for the vision of how this can help to build the future that I want to build. But I also know that I'll never be able to see the whole picture, or all the ways that things could go and didn't, because as far as I understand, we only get to play out one version of the theoretically many plausible futures that could exist. And, well, I just want to stop obsessing over the past and stop stressing over the future and just be in the present, which is the only place that I can actually create that future, or at least increase the probability landscape. Let's call it increase the quality of the probability landscape of creating the futures that I want to create, both individually, selfishly, the things that I want, and more broadly, collectively, the things that would be as close to objective as I can be on like what would be better for everybody, which really is giving people autonomy, the ability to determine their own lives as best we can, mitigating a lot of the totally unnecessary suffering that takes place. I think that's worth exploring in a future video, though, and also maybe writing out of like I talk and think about building systems that self-correct instead of self-destruct. But maybe, given that I haven't done a whole lot of super deep exploration of like what are those systems self-correcting towards over the last year and a half. More than none, but maybe less than enough. And I think that that is a good thing to help to clarify my direction and help to give me the right frame for making decisions when most of the toughest decisions that I'm ever going to have to make, there's not going to be a clear right or wrong answer. It's hard. Life is hard. There's a lot of uncertainty. And as much as I would like there to not be uncertainty, well, I guess that's part of the fun of it, right? It's like we don't really know how the story ends, and we just got to do the best we can. And that's what we can do.